Fighting for her future. Tonight, Theresa May pledges to get the Conservative Party out of the mess she got them into. There was a united front at Cabinet earlier, but right now the Prime Minister is facing a powerful committee of backbench MPs. Well, it's been another day of drama here at Westminster. The opening of Parliament could now be delayed, and many of the Tory manifesto pledges will not survive. Also on the programme, Brexit bites. The number of EU nurses applying to work in the UK drops by 96%. The waitress who survived the London terror attacks talks about what she went through.
I guess I was just thinking I don't want to die. I want to get through this.
And he's not coming where he's not welcome. Donald Trump may pull out of the state visit here.
From Westminster, this is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening from Westminster, where an embattled Theresa May tonight faced a showdown over her future as Prime Minister. Mrs May met Tory backbench MPs after the disastrous election campaign left both her and her party weakened. She told them the mess was her fault and she dragged them out of it. But there's still no deal with the DUP, and there are likely to be delays to both next week's Queen's speech and the crucial start of Brexit negotiations. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Can we welcome those new colleagues who are sitting around the
Theresa May has managed to assemble a government
I think is absolutely essential, which is to provide some stability for the country.
but she needs Parliament's support to allow them to govern, and that requires agreement from the Democratic Unionists. Without that, she can't even write a Queen's speech.
We're still forming the programme for government. Obviously, we're in talks with the Democratic Unionist Party to see the deal that we can put together, and I'm very optimistic that will happen. But obviously, until we have that, we can't agree the final details of the Queen's speech.
Leaving Cabinet, the Defence Secretary said she had their support. Sir Michael, did everyone back the Prime Minister today?
Absolutely.
Everyone pleased with her performance? Silence. The Prime Minister then moved on to a tougher audience, her MPs. She was contrite, telling them, "I got us into this mess and I am going to get us out." In the short term, that involves meeting the DUP leader Arlene Foster tomorrow. She says there's no reason why her party shouldn't do a deal at Westminster.
Of course, the parliamentarians would wish to play as full a role as they possibly can in our national parliament, just as some in Sinn Féin would like to play a role in the Irish parliament. I think this is a tremendous opportunity, not just for this party, but for Northern Ireland in terms of the nation.
But the DUP is more socially conservative than most Tories, which has worried the Conservatives' rising star so much she has sought assurances from the Prime Minister, in particular on gay rights.
There is an absolute commitment, and it was reaffirmed right around the Cabinet table today, as well as in a private meeting with the Prime Minister, that there will be no rollback of LGBTI rights in the rest of the United Kingdom, and we'll use our influence to help promote LGBTI rights and women's rights in Northern Ireland itself. And that had unanimous agreement around the Cabinet table and in that private meeting with the Prime Minister.
The Queen's speech and the start of Brexit talks were due next Monday. Now both may be delayed. The speech could even clash with Royal Ascot, leaving the Queen staring at a different set of horses from those she might have hoped. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, while the exact date of the Queen's speech isn't certain, what is clear is that it will contain significant changes. Mrs May's manifesto plans for pensioners, grammar schools and Brexit will have to be either scrapped or watered down, as our political correspondent Libby Vina explains.
A plan for a stronger, fairer, more prosperous Britain.
Well, that was the idea, but the election result means much of the plan is being ditched. New grammar schools are unlikely to feature. Mrs May had seen them as part of an education revolution, but many Tories, such as Neil Carmichael, who lost his seat, saw them as a backward step.
We're imagining that there was some sort of vista back in the 1950s or 60s which matched the idea of leaving the European Union and Britain sailing across the blue seas, and with a few grammar schools to boot. That's just not what modern Britain is about.
Plans to remove the pensions triple lock and means test the winter fuel allowance are also expected to be dropped. The flagship policy on social care may go too. Dubbed the dementia tax, it caused uproar and a U-turn by the Prime Minister.
I don't think the social care policy is ready to be put into the Queen's speech. I think we need to take much more time to consult and really understand the detail of what we're going to do and how it's going to impact on different kinds of pensioner households.
The speech read out by the Queen in the House of Lords next week on behalf of the government will be very different from the one originally envisaged by Theresa May. Headline policies are being dumped, while others are likely to be altered at the request of members of her cabinet, backbenchers and the DUP. Brexit plans will feature, but it's possible a so-called hard Brexit may become a soft one. MPs won't support Mrs May walking away without a deal.
It's going to be more difficult for the government in a minority to be able to convince MPs that they should accept no deal. And plainly, that if it would have to be absolutely explicitly clear that the deal being offered was significantly worse than no deal.
Having sidelined colleagues in the election campaign, Mrs May now has little choice but to swallow hard and listen to them. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
The delays and disarray are heaping yet more humiliation on Theresa May, who is still to reach a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party. Well, Neil Connery is in Belfast for us tonight. Neil, are we any closer to understanding what the DUP's demands actually are?
Well, all eyes certainly are going to be on this meeting between Theresa May and Arlene Foster tomorrow. The DUP leader stating again today that she wants any deal to result in stability for the whole of the UK. But as you say, what is the price that the DUP is going to extract here? They've talked about wanting to see a lowering of the corporation tax. They want to see a soft border with the Irish Republic after Brexit. They want to see a keeping of the winter fuel allowance and the pensions triple lock as well. But many people here are asking what it all means for Northern Ireland, because of course we had talks today resuming to get the power sharing institutions back up and running, and people are wondering what a Conservative DUP deal is going to mean for the British government's role in brokering those talks.
We don't believe that any deal between the DUP here and the English Tories will be good for the people here, and any deal which undercuts in any way the process here or the Good Friday and the other agreements is one which has to be opposed by progressives.
Well, the DUP must be feeling that all their Christmases have come at once. All the signs tonight are that we are edging towards the announcement of a deal in Downing Street tomorrow.
OK, Neil, thanks very much. As you can see, our political editor, Robert Peston, has joined us now. Robert, that 1922 committee has just finished.
Yep.
So how did Mrs May fare?
Well, look, there's always an element of stage management, show business in all of this, but talking to a lot of backbench MPs afterwards, no question in my mind she did well. In the words of one, she showed her human side, which, as he said, it was something that happened far too rarely during the election campaign. She effectively said sorry. She said that she admitted that she got the party into what she called this mess, and therefore it was her responsibility to get them out. And she said she would serve only for as long as Tory MPs wanted her to do so. Now, for me, the most important thing she said was that she was going to learn the lessons of the general election campaign, in particular that voters wanted more money into schools, public services in general, hospitals, childcare. So I think we can expect the government to be more generous in that respect. Big conclusion, big takeaway, no immediate leadership challenge, but I would still expect her to go sometime in the next year or two.
OK, Robert, thanks very much for that. Well, one of the few positives from election night for the Conservatives was their success in Scotland, of course, taking 12 seats from the SNP. But behind it was a desire from voters for a Brexit that puts the economy first, not immigration. And that's putting even more pressure on Theresa May. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith went to Stirling, once the scene of a legendary rebellion, to hear why voters there turned against the nationalists.
In the land of William Wallace and Scotland's wars of independence, there's an old saying: Whoever holds Stirling holds Scotland. Now Stirling is held by the Conservatives, and Tory victories in key battlegrounds like this one seem to have kicked the SNP's push for another referendum into the long grass, sending Nicola Sturgeon homeward to think again. Janet has been a florist in Stirling for 44 years. She's voted SNP her whole life, but in this election she went blue, sick of referendums and hopeful of a better Brexit.
I import all my flowers and that from Holland, so I worry about that.
Brexit?
Brexit, as to how it'll affect importing my flowers.
Ruth Davidson's arguing for a closer relationship with the single market, maybe a softer Brexit. Would that appeal to you?
I think so, yeah.
And you hope that she'll be able to influence Theresa May?
If you go in with all guns firing, people duck. If you go in and talk gently, they'll listen to you.
When it comes to Brexit, Cameron just wants what's best for his whisky and gin business. There is a sense that the Scottish Tory party can be distinct and altogether more appealing than the one led by Theresa May.
I think Ruth Davidson is a breath of fresh air, and I think the more Ruth Davidsons we have in politics, of all parties, the better for Scottish politics.
But this Tory surge perhaps should not be overstated. Locksmith Paul voted for them for one reason only.
It was about stopping the SNP and stopping their independence referendum yet again. We voted no 2 years ago. We're
Under
going
different circumstances. Brexit completely changes the whole scenario.
The SNP's slogan was giving the people of Scotland a voice, but the majority of Scots don't want independence, and Ruth Davidson heard their frustrations. Now her 13 MPs have their eyes on influencing not just Scottish politics, but the UK's future, and they know Theresa May needs them. Peter Smith, ITV News, Stirling.
There was a warning today that the delayed Brexit talks can't start soon enough because of an NHS recruitment crisis. Recent figures show that only 46 EU nurses and midwives registered in the UK in April this year, compared to 1,304 in July last year. That's a fall of 96%, and unions say the government urgently needs to provide long-term security for foreign workers. Richard Peller reports on the concerns of staff and management at a hospital in Nottinghamshire.
For 15 years, Marika has made Nottingham and the NHS her home, travelling everywhere by bike, one of the few nods these days to her Dutch heritage. But since the Brexit referendum, the number of EU nurses wanting to join her in the UK has reduced dramatically, with concerns over future employment rights affecting those already here too.
The European members of staff are everywhere, and without all those different people within Nottingham, I think that the trust would really struggle if anything were to happen and we all had to leave.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Nationally, 1 in 9 nursing posts are vacant, and the 96% drop in those registering has led the Royal College of Nurses to warn patients could be put at risk. At this trust, where staff retention is far better than the average, 5% of their workforce comes from the EU.
The potential is that our EU nurses are anxious and don't know what's going to happen. They may not want to come and work with us. We're equally anxious that the ones that are here with us may want to leave.
It's a headache that no pills will solve.
I take some blood from you. I need to send a sample to the lab. Is all right?
Yes. With recruitment also affected by the recent introduction of English language testing for EU nationals.
A few patients prefer to be treated by a British nurse, but most of my patients prefer to be treated by a nurse from Portugal, Italy, doesn't matter. We give a good care, we look after them with our heart.
The Department of Health said this evening that EU nurses play a valued role in the NHS and that they would be a priority in Brexit negotiations. Nurses from Nottingham to the Netherlands will be wondering. Richard Pallo, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, the Australian waitress who survived being stabbed in the London terror attack. And embarrassment for the Queen as Donald Trump says he may not come on his state visit. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. A survivor of the London Bridge terror attack has described how she thought she was going to die. Candice Hedge was stabbed in the neck as she worked at a cafe in Borough Market. But the Australian says she's going to stay in London and not let the terrorists defeat her. Sejal Karia reports.
The London Bridge attackers hit a cosmopolitan city. That is reflected in the growing number of tributes left by people from all over the world. It is reflected too in the nationalities of those who lost their lives and those who survived. Among them Candice Hedge from Australia, here recovering in hospital with her family around her.
I'm lucky to be here. It's not really a lucky situation, but considering what happened, it's pretty amazing.
On the night of the attack, she'd been working in a cafe at Borough Market when the 3 terrorists walked in. She tried to hide, but one of them saw her and stabbed her in the throat.
He was there, standing, shouting at those guys, and I was sort of down here, trying not to be seen. But yeah, as he turned around, he spotted me there, and it was just one quick go, and that's it.
A wound that narrowly missed her artery and vocal cords.
I was just thinking, I don't want to die. I want to get through this, and I was thinking for a moment that maybe I wasn't gonna make it.
8 victims weren't so fortunate, and Candice is all too aware how close she came to not making it. But she remains determined to stay in London.
We can't let our lives be ruled by fear, and we need to carry on together, strong.
And that resolute, defiant message is echoed here too among this burgeoning memorial. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
ITV News understands that President Trump has told the Prime Minister several times he doesn't want a state visit to the UK if there are going to be protests. Theresa May invited him over during her trip to the White House back in January. Well, our royal editor Chris Shipp is at Buckingham Palace for us. Chris, this is quite awkward for the Queen, isn't it?
Oh, indeed it is, all rather awkward for everyone here at Buckingham Palace, and officials here have taken the diplomatically wise decision today to say absolutely nothing at all about Donald Trump's state visit. But it's my understanding that Mr. Trump has been telling Theresa May in various phone calls from as early as March that he doesn't want to come on this state visit if there are going to be protests in the UK. And I think there is one thing we can say about a Donald Trump state visit here, and that is that there would be protests, so the visit is effectively off. Now, this all goes back to January when Theresa May was one of the first world leaders through the doors of the White House. Remember, she had that small hand-holding moment with Donald Trump. She took with her the invitation from the Queen, but the Queen only gives that invitation on the advice of government. And Downing Street were clearly very keen, it would seem, to cozy up to Donald Trump in the days after his inauguration.
OK, Chris, thanks very much. Hundreds of people have been detained by police at anti-government protests in Moscow. Thousands of Russians took to the streets of the capital to demonstrate against President Putin. One of those arrested was opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who wants to run against Putin in next year's presidential election. And Emmanuel Macron looks set to strengthen his grip on power following a strong performance by his party in the French parliamentary elections. En Marche is projected to win almost 3/4 of the seats. And finally tonight, some say that nothing changes in politics, but here at Westminster, we're about to see the most diverse intake ever. There are more female MPs, more minority ethnic backgrounds, and fewer who went to fee-paying schools. Geraint Vincent met some of the Parliament's new order.
It is still some way from an accurate reflection, but Parliament now looks a little more like the people it represents. Election results mean that there will be more women working here, more gay people, people with disabilities, and more representatives from ethnic minorities. The new member for Slough will be the first turbaned Sikh in the House of Commons.
I will definitely add a splash of colour to Parliament. But I think my wife must take credit, for the colour coordination. I think, for me, even, going according to the Sikh ethos of Sarbat da Bhala, which basically means working for the betterment of everyone.
Westminster likes to honour the struggle and sacrifices for freedom and democracy around the world, but the Mother of Parliaments is yet to deliver true representation. Just over half of the UK's population is female, but less than a third of new MPs are women.
It shouldn't be a news story that there are women in Parliament. It should be just the case that it is a 50-50 Parliament. It just shows that we have some way to go.
From South Manchester, the city's first Muslim MP arrives in Westminster with a reminder that achieving diversity isn't just an exercise in political correctness.
I think if you look around what's happening, especially what we've seen in the last 3 months here, it's so important to have good role models. So young Muslims should be able to see that we are part and parcel of here, so they can look forward to this and they work hard to this, make this society a better place.
This Parliament convenes at a challenging time in a society facing unprecedented tests. So representative democracy needs to mean what it says. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
Well, that's all for now. Tom Bradby will be back with news at 10. But for me and the whole team, enjoy your evening. Goodbye.